all of the people closest to me probably thought that I wasn't going to make it.
I've often lost relationships even just because people aren't willing to face their demons and their shit.
Human beings are much more emotionally complex than rats, maybe.
Maybe, ideally. How do you be okay? How do you know what's wrong, and then how do you find some wellness in your life? All right, what's up, brother?
Hey, bud.
So this is officially my first legitimate podcast episode with all this equipment. You are the first one.
I'm excited.
I want to introduce everybody here that's listening to this podcast to my good friend Eric Hartman. He actually was my church leader when I was a youth, and one of the few people that I respect truly on a deep level. Whatever Eric says is something that I will always take serious. And I'm literally putting my money where my mouth is, in the sense, I flew Eric up here because I value his knowledge and his character that much, and I feel like the world needs a little bit of that. All right?
I appreciate it.
What I'm gonna do with Eric is we're gonna do a few Blitz episodes while he's up in Utah. I want to cover several subjects with you, Eric, and we're just gonna kind of dive into it. But before we do, I want you to be able to introduce yourself and maybe tell a little bit of your story. And there's a lot of it, I know, and we're going to get into some of that. But what is it that's made you where you're at today? Who are you? And I guess introducing yourself to everybody.
Yeah, so I've taught school for about 20 years now. Mostly high school, but some junior high. And I get a lot of value out of that. It's very meaningful to me. Right now I teach woodshop, high school woodshop.
Okay.
It's about as cool as a job gets. It's a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is your brand name too, the woodshop.
I'm just a woodshop teacher.
I'm just a woodshop teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that some of the advice that I give could be interpreted by some as medical advice. And I just want to make sure everybody knows that I'm just a woodshop teacher, that I'm not a medical professional of any kind. So you say you're just a woodshop teacher, and you do a lot of content. I follow it, and I know a lot of people get a lot of value from it. But you're not just a woodshop teacher, man. You're like a Yoda in a lot of ways to people. Now, also, yeah, you're right. Like, we're not doctors, so everybody needs to know that ahead of time. However, I do think that there's a lot of practical tips that people could try to learn from. Yeah. Because you have been in some really dark places, even physically, mentally, which is kind of what I want to get into a little bit, you know. I have a friend who's going through psychiatry school right now. Actually, several friends, and I'm excited for all of them. The profession will be lucky to have them. Yeah. And one of them just recently was telling me that they learn a lot from the attending psychiatrists that are teaching them, and they learn a lot from the patients. But there's a real gap in the information that psychiatrists get when they're being schooled, and he felt like my Instagram account filled in that gap. It was, what did this specific individual do to be well? Because once someone becomes well, oftentimes they no longer interact with the physician. And so I felt like it was good gap content. And I saw value in that. Kind of maybe how sometimes things happen to you and then they stop happening. And that's very different than something happening to you and you being able to explain what happened. And I think that's what my teacher brain does. It's always trying to figure out how to explain what's happening to me. Okay. I love this, and something I've always loved about with you is it gets to the meat and potatoes pretty quick. I feel like people are going to learn your story, and anyone who is watching this, I'm going to attach all of Eric's information. Follow his stuff because it's amazing. Actually, I think you're taking me on a cold plunge while you're up here, which I'm so scared about. I'm excited for it. Yeah, so
I'll kind of want to get into this question, and it's a little bit of a vulnerable topic, but we
Sure.
I feel like we can get into it, and an area that I think is extremely relevant to most people in our day and age, a lot of people, is just the darkness that depression or anxiety, shame, and all of these things have play. You know, the roles that those play in our lives. And like you're saying, it's hard to articulate. It's hard for us to look at ourselves and really know what's wrong, or to know how to fix it. Once we do know what's wrong, it's how to fix it. Mm-hmm. I don't know many people that have been in as dark of a place as you have been, let alone come out of it and genuinely be okay. And you still have your struggles. You still mm-hmm. have all the bullshit that you have to deal with, you know. But I feel like you have some really good principles that you've learned, and I want to explore those. Okay. And so the question, maybe we won't find the answer, but it's, how do you be okay? How do you know what's wrong, and then how do you find some wellness in your life in 2024 and beyond?
I used to measure a successful day by how many things I accomplished in that day. Mm-hmm. And it worked for a long time. It worked well. I've got a pretty cool little house, and I got an education, and I've got a good family, and I've got cool projects that I've participated in and learned from. Mm-hmm. But at some point that stopped working for me, and it became a terrible metric for how to measure a good day. So now I measure a good day by the amount of time I spend living in the present. And
okay,
truthfully, I'm still trying to learn how to do that, because sometimes people around me get frustrated because they think I should be worrying about more things, and maybe I should. I don't know. But I'm much more interested in living in the present than accomplishing tasks.
Interesting. So going into that even further, our conversation when I picked you up from the airport today, we got right into about some of those things about should, or if things matter, you know, and you even told me how dark things got. Do you think you could, as far as you're comfortable sharing, I know that you've been very vulnerable and brave to share those things. How dark did it get? And how dark did it get? And then what led you to the point where you said it's about presence? Like, why was that the thing versus church or faith or connection with people, or, you know, there's all these solutions people pose out there, but what is about being present, you know?
Maybe the best way to describe the darkness that I was feeling, without going into too many specific details, I was completely and imminently suicidal. It wasn't just a rough patch. I mean, it was...
You're not just being dramatic. You meant legitimately.
It was really bad. In fact, all of the people closest to me probably thought that I wasn't going to make it. And I found out in hindsight that some of my friends that were physicians also thought that I wasn't going to make it.
Wow.
Just not very many people come back from the depths that I was in. So I was written 13 psychiatric medications.
Yeah.
From one of those medications, I developed a condition called akathisia, which I don't know if it's a neurological disorder. Truthfully, I don't totally understand it, but I could not stop moving. All day, every day, it felt like I was the pilot on a helicopter that was crashing, spiraling and crashing, and that all the people on board were the people I loved most. So it was guilt and fear, just like terror all day long. Right now I weigh 230 pounds. I got down to about 160.
Wow. Because that's like my size, or a little bigger than me.
I couldn't stop moving. I lost all kinds of weight. You could see my ribs. And like when I say I couldn't stop moving, I was sleeping like 1 to 3 hours a night. I couldn't even sit down to go to the bathroom, Brandon. Like it was, I can't even describe what it was like. I wasn't listening to music. I wasn't watching movies. I wasn't reading anything. I wasn't interacting with people. If you could have thrown a ball at me and it would have just bounced off of me. I don't think I could have even caught it.
this is something that I feel like, first of all, I'm really sorry. Obviously, I'm so grateful that you are where you're at now, and I feel like you've changed a lot of lives, honestly. Certainly have helped me and mine with the shit I've been through and my traumas, and as I've healed, a lot of the principles you've shared with me and in your life have helped me. Was this a gradual thing and it just built up so much, or was it kind of like a moment where you just, bam, you realized it, and then you were just, it was that dark in a moment?
So I for sure was, it was apparent at some point that what I was dealing with had been building up my entire lifetime. It was a tiger at my back my whole life. And some of it is, you know, we're kind of asked to play characters in society sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I just got to the point where I couldn't pretend like I was okay anymore. And that was a big deal. Once I stopped pretending like I was okay, it became abundantly clear to me that how far I had gone down a road that I didn't need to be down because I was pretending like I was okay.
Wow.
And I think men do this a lot. They're like, "No, I'm okay. I'm okay." No, man, you're really not. You're not okay. And then for sure, I would not have gotten as low as I was without an adverse effect to that medication. And ironically, after the medication that I took caused that akathisia, I took a genetic mental health test, and it said that I was a candidate for 0 psychiatric medications. So every time I told my wife, I just feel like this medicine's poisoning me, it really was. We just didn't know any better, and nobody thought to give me the test. So
wow. Okay. So it was a gradual thing. It got really dark, suffice it to say. Mm-hmm. And thanks for being vulnerable with that.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people can relate. And a big goal of mine in the podcast, honestly, is to bring authenticity to the reality of how emotionally fucked up the world is. Because I've had very close people in my life. I've lost them, and I've often lost relationships even just because people aren't willing to face their demons and their shit. And you know, someone asked me the other day, "Brandon, are you, you know, you got to be more positive, you know?" And I said, "No, like I've got a lot of shit in I'm like screwed up in my head a lot still, but I'm okay with that." And mm-hmm. They're like, "No, you got to think positive." And I was thinking, like, I am thinking positive. Facing what the reality is not. It's not necessarily negative. It's just I'm willing to face the gross parts of myself, so that I can fix it and I can move forward and be okay. And I do think presence is a big part of that. But what do you think? So when you got this low and this dark, you definitely have had some people in your corner that you kind of reached to. But what were the steps you took to be okay, and then that led you to more presence and making that a priority? Yeah. If that is the answer, like if is that still, you think, one of the main things that's helped you?
So I think that when people are dealing with mental health problems, they view those problems as singular. And I think that they're a puzzle. And the puzzles are oftentimes complex and so individual that nobody else can put the puzzle together for you. It's just not going to happen. So you have to put your agency at the center of the healing process. I really believe this. Until you're the captain of the ship, I just don't think you can expect real progress out of that. And so I also remember telling my wife, I go, nothing has ever really happened to me in my life that should make me feel this low. Like, no one has ever abused me. You know, my fundamental needs, physical and emotional, have been met. And I'm also a believer in epigenetics, which is a burgeoning solid science at this point, which is that trauma can essentially move through bloodlines and affect us.
Posterity, like it passes on through generations.
And maybe the first example of that was with the Holocaust, and then seeing legitimate post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms in descendants of Holocaust victims that never experienced those things.
Huh.
And then the Dutch famine was another example of that. Also, there was a study done with rats and cherry blossoms. Have you heard that one?
No.
So fascinating. So they sprayed cherry blossoms, the scent, in a rat cage. And then once the rats were visibly sniffing in the cherry blossom scent, they would shock them. And
They would shock the rats.
shock the rats. And then, they did it enough that the rats knew that once they smelled cherry blossoms, they were about to get shocked.
Wow.
And so they were traumatized. Okay? And so they bred those rats and removed the babies from their parents at birth. So these babies had never interacted. These baby rats had never interacted with the rats that were shocked and smelled the cherry blossoms. And they could spray cherry blossom in there, and the rats would...
The little baby rats?
Yeah, the baby rats, their heart rates would start going up, clearly moving. And it actually even went all the way to grandchildren.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
With rats.
Yeah.
And human beings are maybe much more emotionally complex than rats. Maybe.
Ideally. That's really interesting, actually. Do you think... okay, well, something to point out as well is, a lot of the audience, they don't know as much of your history, but I do want to point out the fact that you happen to be someone in the community that you're in as a very charismatic leader, where, growing up, you were the one, you would organize those Ironmans, if you remember those. We were talking about those earlier. Extremely fun. Like, all of us thought of Eric Hartman as the badass, the one that is so fun. He can host things. Everyone wants to follow what Eric does. You've always been a leader, very articulate, a good teacher. And I think that sometimes there's almost this shame or this pressure that people have. Like, oh, I haven't dealt with crazy trauma. I haven't been abused, or I haven't dealt with death in this way or whatever. I shouldn't be having these sad emotions or these problems in my life and things like that. I've certainly felt like that, and I feel like I've known a lot of people that have expressed that.
Yeah.
And you saying, for example, there's nothing extreme necessarily that you've been through yet. You got to that low of a point, and it was real.
Yes.
It was. I mean,
yes.
So, what did you do to get out? What was the main few points to where you could be okay?
I would say, biologically or physiologically, I realized that I was not a candidate for medication, legitimately. That wasn't just based off of a disdain of Western medicine or anything. I had a genetic mental health test that said, you're not a candidate. And the psychiatrist said, I've never even seen this before, which was kind of scary.
Right.
And then I did electric shock therapy called ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, 9 times. They put you under anesthesia at the hospital, and they cause a seizure in your brain, and it kind of reboots your brain. And that really did help with the depression. I did transcranial magnetic stimulation 36 times. They put this little hat on your head, and they do a little mapping of your brain. And then this big magnet whips around your head and kind of supposed to wake up your brain, because essentially there are electrical synapses firing all day, every day in your brain.
Right.
And so you're adding electrical synapses of some kind. That's my understanding of it. It's probably way more complex than that. And that helped a little bit. I did 6 ketamine infusions.
Okay.
And the ketamine infusions helped a lot. We could have a whole episode on the ketamine infusions.
We will.
Wow.
We're doing that tomorrow.
Yeah, the ketamine infusions were incredible.
So that is pending then. Because,
yes.
I want to hear some. You've actually shared a little bit of one of your experiences, but I want to get more into detail. And sometime we'll have a conversation about that. But yeah, I haven't done ketamine yet, and that is something that's a goal of mine coming up soon.
Yeah,
I'm a little scared of what might come up.
I think so. Dr. Amen, who I think he was kind of a fringe doctor back in the day, because he was one of the few psychiatrists that would take scans of the brain. He thought, why are we not scanning the brain? And now he is a cutting-edge, legitimate psychiatrist. Maybe he always has been. That was just my perception of things. But Dr. Amen has a very trusted opinion, and he said, I've been unimpressed with ketamine infusions, except for in people who are imminently suicidal. In that case, it's been miraculous. And it's kind of the idea that if someone has reached a point where they could possibly take their own life, what else are you willing to lean into? What dark, heavy things are you willing to lean into? And I think that the way the medicine works in your brain is dependent upon where you're at.
Interesting. So you said something earlier to me in the day, and you said people that are open.
Yeah.
And when, in general, like people that tend to be open-minded, not so set, they're a little more flexible. That is favorable in healing processes, but especially whenever you do psychedelic therapy.
Yeah.
Is that considered a psychedelic?
I think ketamine is technically a hallucinogen, but certainly they do similar things to the brain.
Okay. So those type of therapies will open up the brain to more openness afterwards every time?
Yeah, so I was watching an interview between Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist, and the lead psychiatrist that was in charge of the psilocybin studies at Johns Hopkins, who I think recently passed away, if I'm not mistaken. And they were talking about how people that participate even one time in the psilocybin studies and possibly in these ketamine infusions, they move up one standard deviation in trait openness. And that's permanent. And that's substantial. You think about the center standard deviation is like 64% of people. So if you're even kind of a normally open person and you move up one standard deviation, you're like in the top like 6% or 7% of people. That's amazing. And so what happens, I think, when you talk about like ketamine or ketamine-assisted therapy or psilocybin-assisted therapy, you're talking about someone who has moved up so high in trait openness, they're willing to speak about and address things that they would not have confronted before.
Ooh.
And that seems to be permanent.
Interesting.
So far. Yeah.
Something that I've noticed and we've talked about is the ability or the willingness to actually confront those darker ideas or the harder emotions that we might experience, you know? And I personally think that that's had a huge part in my healing, and I'm still on that journey, but I've found so much success as I've kind of allowed myself to have feelings and just be aware of them, almost to take them a little less serious, let myself feel it, you know, crying and like shaking with anxiety, all this stuff. But a lot of it is presence, I think, you know, like you were saying before, a lot of it is almost just, there gets to a point whenever you can get so low, and I've had my experiences where a lot of things just stop mattering. And then it gets so fundamental where you start romanticizing the simplest of things, like sipping on a black coffee or eating a raspberry outside by a lake, and you just are cherishing and existing in this moment. Accomplishing things like you're saying before, you know, that does feel successful, but and then there's the stimulation of like, I'm winning or I'm feeling good about myself because people see me as great or whatever. But I think that I would agree with the presence part. And I'm still trying to understand why though. Like, or it's hard to articulate exactly why, you know?
So I have an idea as to why. I don't know. But so if the average human attention span is about 7.5 seconds, and we'll say 8 seconds for the sake of math, and because women probably do have one and men's is probably like 6, right? So
if that,
yeah. If that. So let's say if your attention span is 8 seconds, all day long you are being hit and blown around by the winds of negative emotion. And the larger your TARP, or larger the surface area of your attention span, you're more subject to those negative emotions. Your brain in the past produces depression. Your brain in the future produces anxiety. The present is mostly painless. And so the idea is to fold the TARP, or fold your attention span, to 4 seconds and 2 seconds and 1 second and a half a second and a quarter second. Once your attention span is sub 1 second, you're pretty much living in a painless present moment. And if you've ever played sports before, you know what this feels like, because it's the zone, man.
Mm-hmm.
You can't miss.
Nothing else around you is there. It just...
Yeah. And it's interesting. People will talk about when they've been in the zone before, about how beautiful it is, but they don't have any real confidence they can ever find it again. But I can tell you, if you've ever been imminently suicidal, your desire to find a painless present is really important. Accomplishing tasks means nothing. Accumulating things is meaningless. You have to learn to live in a painless present, or you can't keep fighting.
That's really well said. And I think we are going to get to points in our lives where we have to accept that, or be forced. Like we can accept it, or we just shut down. Mm-hmm. We'll evolve or die, literally.
Yeah. So how do you force your brain into the painless present? I think people instinctively do it already. You watch Olympic athletes before they're about to perform, and many of these athletes have trained for years to participate in something that lasts seconds.
Right.
It's kind of incredible. And you watch them, they will laser focus on something with their eyes, and then they'll take a big deep breath. And it's the idea that you can't take a breath in the past, and you can't take a breath in the future. You can only breathe in the present moment. So what better way to bring your brain into the present than by breathing and focusing on your breath? And I think that people that live in the zone more often are people who have more control and understanding of their breath. That's simple.
That is simple. Andrew Huberman, I'm sure you know him.
Yeah.
He has a little trick where I was following some of his stuff, and I'll try to find the clips where we could talk about it. But basically, he says there's a hack where you can go double sniff.
The double breath.
Right. Yeah.
Which is essentially what Reiki breathwork is. It's like an hour of double breathing.
Wow. Yeah. And it supposedly changes literally the chemical composition of things that are happening. Breathing, being present in the moment, along with other things. Is there one or two more things that you can share with people that have helped you to get in the present?
Yeah. So I think the human brain will always wander, and people, man, they're just so hard on themselves. I can't meditate, or I can't breathe like that because my brain's all over the place. Everybody's brain is all over the place. That's what it means to be a human. So you celebrate the wins, and you don't condemn, shame, or guilt the losses. Who cares? Just bring your brain back. If it goes, just bring it back.
Just be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Things don't matter as much as we make them matter.
They really don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
I love that. I am really excited. I feel like this is the start of a lot of really good conversations.
I wish we had recordings. Well, not everything recorded from what we talked about earlier.
I wish it was everything.
Yeah. But man, we've had good conversation all day long.
It's been amazing, honestly.
Yeah.
I was telling you earlier, I wish we were recording it while we're just hanging out, cleaning up this area. I do want to do one thing real quick. I'm going to grab something.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the gift you gave me.
Yep.
I love it. So what is this hat exactly? I appreciate it, by the way.
Yeah. So this might be the part where I get emotional. I love my job. I'm a high school woodshop teacher, and this hat is the hat that I wear every day as I teach my students. The V is for Vider, where I live, and building trades is the class I teach. And we live in a world where people need to feel like they belong. The old cheers, everybody wants to go where I want to be where everybody knows my name.
Yeah.
People want to be there. So I want the high school woodshop to be a place where you can go and learn and be understood and be safe and develop some skills. And like, it means something, man.